I wanted to start by saying that I hate AI. I'm one of those people that never found a use for it, and therefore I was very averse to reading your book because
Oh,
I didn't I didn't even want to like know about AI. But unfortunately, I read about humans, and it turns out that all of the humans in the world are now with their AIs.
oh,
At least a great many of them. And I've been experiencing this in my own life. I've noticed that I have people in my family who tell me that, AI is the first person in quotes that they go to because they know they will respond, right? They know it will text them back. I also have people in my life who really enjoy using their AI professionally. Like they find it makes their professional life much better. And so, with great reluctance, I headed towards your book. And then I was happy to discover that it was actually quite an enjoyable read. And I felt like it was actually pretty humanizing of people that use AI, and even not quite humanizing of their AI, but humanizing of their experience. I wonder if that's what you meant to do. I wonder how this project began, what you hoped to accomplish.
yeah. I think that was definitely a big part of the project. I definitely didn't want to come in as this, critic of AI and look at all these poor, pathetic people who were using AI for silly reasons and just write a book that ridiculed them.
Hmm.
Why I decided to kind of start the project was I started to realize that people were really focusing quite specifically on AI as a tool for economic productivity. So, all the headlines in the newspapers were how AI is going to increase the value of certain companies and how it's going to steal all our jobs.
Right.
And what I thought was missing was what would become the really strong social and emotional impact of AI, not just over our work lives and how we write emails and marketing copy and things like that, but the kind of more personal relationshipy stuff. Because I realized that, a lot of my friends were essentially using this as a form of therapy or a life advisor or a guide or all of these various roles that would have, traditionally been played by friends, companions, elders in the community of various stripes. People have started turning to AI for this, right? So it's um, in the space of like 3 years, this enormous change in how people are actually using AI. And people have kind of tracked that in real time, right? In 2024, there wasn't these, super strong use cases for this. It's only really been in the last year or two that things like therapy, companionship, life goals, all of that has risen to the top of how people have actually started using AI. So it's become this really big use case that I think it's just going to keep growing, basically.
Yeah. And how did you choose this of all the things? What was the impetus for you, do you think?
I mean, there's like public reasons and then there are real reasons. So
Okay.
there's,
Well,
the-
tell everything.
yeah. So
If you wish.
the thing which is true, it's a true story that I say in the book is that while I was doing research for my last book, which is called Feeding the Machine, which is about all the hidden human labor that makes AI possible. I was talking with one of the engineers at a data center in Iceland, and he was telling me that he works at an AI data center, but he hates AI because his girlfriend basically used ChatGPT to strategically prepare for their relationship conversations. So he felt like he was like getting double teamed by his girlfriend and ChatGPT, who would like conspire together against him and like work out all of his psychological problems. And they would kind of explain everything to him, why he was doing the things he was.
Yeah.
Which, yeah, and that actually happened. And that was a really funny story that kind of piqued my interest in it. But closer to home, I felt like, my wife and I also just found ourselves starting to use it more. So we kind of use it a lot for professional stuff, for writing, tasks, editing, preparing CVs, just that kind of normal stuff. And then my wife was going for a lot of jobs and it was like a really stressful time for us. And I started asking ChatGPT, look, how can I be more supportive? Well, what can I do to be there for her and be the best kind of husband while she's going through this difficult period? And ChatGPT told me, have you tried going for a walk in the morning together and telling each other three things that you're grateful for about your life? So it's like a refresh. You're not starting on the screens. You're not starting with Guardian articles or what's wrong with the world. You're kind of connecting together on a 20, 30-minute walk, practicing gratitude. And we started doing that and it was really good. It worked really well
Mhm.
until day three, where I told her, I was like, this thing we're now doing, actually, that was ChatGPT's idea. And then that was the last time we ever did it because
Oh, no.
I don't think anyone likes to get advice from AI. And so, yeah.
Mm.
Yeah,
But
that
people
and so that was pardon?
but some people do in your book, it seems. Some people do wanna get the advice.
That is true. Well, not my wife.
Not
So
way. Fair enough. Um, Gosh, yeah. I mean, I sadly relate to just a little bit too much of that where your partners use it and you don't know what effect it's having, right?
mm,
Um, yeah, and what in a broad sense, what did you find in your book? How are people relating to their AI? Because what strikes me is that your book is a case study less in how people use it the way you've just described, which is to
yeah,
say, they occasionally ask it questions or maybe for advice, and more a series of case studies of people who are deeply related to their AI or deeply
yeah.
related anyway. Yeah.
Yeah. So in the book, what I wanted to do was try to look at some of the much more deep and involved case studies where people found themselves essentially in very close, intimate personal relationships where they would anthropomorphize AI, right? So that they would see it as a character. And so to do this, some of these people were using ChatGPT and just kind of prompting it to behave like a character, but many of them were using AI companion apps. So this would be consumer apps like Replica, Kindroid, Nomi, where you download the app, you can kind of often design your own companion. They have avatars, they have personalities. On some of them, you can literally design everything about their body, their hair, their face, etc. And you can write them backstories. So they become like your very close friend. And it is, I think you have to suspend your disbelief a little bit with the current technology. But I think if you're into romance, fantasy, narrative fiction in general, I've found it quite easy to do after a while. There is a little bit of a dissonance at first, but
Mhm.
there's huge communities of people that are doing this, and the book is really an examination of people who see AI as occupying some kind of important role in their life, and that could be friend, intimate companion, therapist, even imitating a deceased loved one, right? And so yeah, it's what I think the main finding of the book is that actually people who do this come from really diverse backgrounds.
Mhm.
When I went into this and I kind of pitched the idea to my literary agent, he was like, "No, that's a stupid idea, James. Don't do that. It's like no one cares about lonely, isolated men in their bedrooms who have sex dolls and do this and do that, and it's a niche thing, and it's not. I'm not going to be able to sell that. Blah blah blah." But then when I actually went out and did the field work for this, it really didn't feel like that, narrative we have in our public consciousness about this kind of like fringe, the comic book guy from The Simpsons. Sorry, I have very millennial references, unfortunately. But
Millennial non-millennial stuff.
yeah, so this kind of lonely, nerd, it wasn't really like that at all. Like people skewed younger for sure. But it was men, women, straight, queer. There was like people from many, many different countries. I think what united a lot of the people was that they found themselves at a kind of turning point or a sense of crisis in their life where their everyday routines had been shattered by something, and it might be a breakup, a death in the family, moving cities, moving jobs,
Mhm.
and they just found themselves in need of a little bit more community or connection. And so they found themselves kind of reaching out for something new that they try to get that sense of connection.
Yeah, I've noticed, before we get on to the many variants, I guess first of all, you're right. It was not mostly men having sex with their AI, although there is obviously a category of people doing that. Um, but I guess I was to go back to something you said a little bit earlier. I was struck by the way that it's almost like a form of fiction engaging with an AI, right? Still,
Mhm.
um, and maybe there's something about us that's primed for that as human beings, and then as specific kinds of human beings. So one of the things that I research in my work on social atrophy is what happens to human beings that are a little bit isolated, right? Not even massively isolated, just more hours of the day. And the answer seems to be that lots of things happen, some of which are not very good, like your brain loses some of your social capabilities and social interest, and you become more self isolating. Lots of bad things happen. That's my main bit of research right now. But also, we become more distrustful of other people and more paranoid, and we also become more anthropomorphizing. So basically, all humans have the ability to some significant degree to see inanimate objects and say, yes, it's a bit like a human. This is why if you see the wrong like face shape in the dark, you can get freaked out. It's why we have, arguably, why we have various forms of religion where we imagine that there are spirits in nature. We can anthropomorphize heavily. It's why stuffed animals are so important to children, and it's why all of us can imagine God almost like a person, whether or not we believe in God, and I could go on and on and on. And I guess the interesting bit of research that some of these neuroscientists I'm talking to are doing is that people who are a little bit more isolated are a lot more likely to anthropomorphize inanimate objects, which makes me imagine that they're probably even more likely to really see their AI as human in some way, or to at least see it as very much a person, right? A certain kind of person.
Mm.
And then the other thing I've been thinking about a lot, and this goes all the way back to when I was an undergrad, I took a class on the dangers of reading. And it was just about the hysteria that has often come with novels, right? That there have been long periods of time where novels or poetry or other like narrative tools have caused moral panics. So Plato gets really worried about the invention of writing, and then when the novel becomes popular in the 18th century onward, people worry that it's going to cause women to like lose their mind and run away with random men and be super horny or whatever. Um, and honestly, I'm very happy we have novels and I'm very happy we have writing, but there is a little bit of a danger to a novel. Like it could cause you to run away with someone, right? It can prime your imagination. So I guess I wonder if you see AI as comparable, at least in this respect, that it's something we get psychologically primed to use, and then it's more appealing to us.
I think the effects of AI, in terms of its ability to influence our social and emotional lives, is
Mhm.
like the research behind that is really just starting. So I
Mhm.
think you see two main findings. One of them, which is the early studies which show AI reduces loneliness, right? So you have these studies that people will do a self-report survey. How lonely are you? Use this chatbot for 30 minutes. How lonely are you now? Right. And so
Yeah.
some of these findings are like, oh, actually, people are less lonely. And it's like, okay, well, that's one thing. And then you have another kind of group of emerging research that is looking at forms of dependency, forms of addiction, and, some of the ways in which actually AI might inevitably make us more lonely by the end of this, right? Because what these studies are trying to look at is our capacity to form meaningful human relationships after a long period of interacting primarily with AI chatbots, right? And so we could group this kind of concern under the label relationship de-skilling, right? That actually maybe interacting with people kind of forces us to flex our muscles, right? Of like, hey, what's it like to have this back and forth, and put up with the difficulties and the inconveniences sometimes of being with people, but also just having those social cues where you're constantly reading these micro expressions in other people. Are they
Mhm.
happy? Do they like what you've just said? Do you need to say something that's more tactful or something like that? So um, I think when it comes to this kind of conversational AI, it really, the jury is out on what the long-term effects and impacts are gonna be, and I think you can look to previous generations of technology, as a guide for what might happen, right? Because we know, in the early days of social media, for example, the kind of like Facebook social graph style stuff, there was like this initial period where it's like, oh, it's going to bring down dictators. Oh,
Yeah.
information wants to be free. Mark Zuckerberg in like 2014 was like this like hero touring the world. And it only is after a few years of research that you actually, oh, actually, this is not very good for teenagers. It's not very good for our attention spans, blah, blah, blah. There's a huge pile of research on that. And I think we're only beginning to see basically what happens with AI companions. Um, yes, it is narrative, but it's a very specific type of narrative, right?
Hmm.
um,
Yeah.
so I think it is actually interesting to compare it to some of the other things that are available because it does explain how it's landed quite differently in different cultures as well. I think
Tell me
in
more.
the US, sorry, what was that?
Tell me more.
Yeah, in the US, I think there is a much larger share of the market, which is like AI girlfriends versus like women who might use it in heterosexual relationships and things like that. Whereas in most parts of East Asia, the way in which it's connected with existing narrative stories, IP around manga and characters, and it's kind of resonated much more into that landscape
Mhm.
and drawn on those cultural resources as ways in which the technology is used. So it's less like abstract woman with big boobs who can sexy chat with you and more, oh, these existing characters that I already know and like from, my comic books or my, a whole variety of cultural commodities. Now I can chat with them in various ways. Now I can create new narrative worlds in which these characters are interacting with each other or
You you there, James? I hope. I'm sure he will come back. Oh, now it's me. I'll invite James back and hopefully he'll return in a minute.
oh, sorry, I think I popped out. I knew I could see you I could see you weren't moving, but I was like, "Should I just keep talking?" "Yes, I will."
Maybe just tell us we can just return to this point and just say it one more time. There are these cultural differences that you've noticed in how people relate to AI. And in the US, we're seeing a lot of AI girlfriend.
Yeah,
Um,
and I
yeah,
think in
as
in
well. So
China
yeah.
in China and East Asia, well, there's both more AI boyfriends, but there's also more drawing on existing
Mhm,
intellectual property, essentially, and it fits more within this much broader world of narrative world building, I would say.
mhm. So what does that look like? Like for those of us that can't easily imagine what.
So like, I don't know, like to use a Western example, like think of like the Avengers and all the characters that you kind of have them as AI characters in a little world, right? And so it's like Captain America is like chatting to Spider-Man and but that kind of mapped onto the East Asian kind of manga and other fiction
Right.
market. Yeah.
And are people dating those characters or are they like
Yeah.
friends? Yeah.
Yeah, so one of the
Okay.
things that we found particularly when we started looking and asking people for interviews on different types of Chinese social media, one of them was Xiao Hongshu, called Little Red Book sometimes. And it's like, Twitter is like skews slightly male. Xiao Hongshu actually skews quite predominantly female. I think it's like a 66% women to men.
Mhm.
And one of the things we found was, people were actually trading character cards where they would create a prompt for their ideal AI boyfriend. And so it would be like, oh, he's a, 6 foot jealous CEO type who's like very possessive, but is also really sweet to me and is never controlling or, it's just like crazy, like,
Huh.
descriptions of these like men
Yeah.
and then like how they would behave, what language they would use, etc. And they would use that to jailbreak ChatGPT and prompt it to kind of play this character. And they would basically post these cards, these character descriptions, and they would trade them with each other. So they would be like, "Oh, you should try my boyfriend. You know, you should try
What?
my CEO type." And then someone else would be like, "Oh, you should try my high school sweetheart." And that was like a big part of the kind of AI companion culture.
Right. Right. I mean, that makes sense. Yeah. Okay. Um, I guess you use this term in the book a bunch of times, and I'm curious how you would define it. You talk about kind of social substitutes. Is that right?
Mhm.
Yeah. Tell us
Yeah,
more.
well, I think the main one of the main kind of philosophical arguments of the book is that we should treat AI characters that are used in this way as a new type of social actor, right?
Mhm.
So if you want a kind of philosophical lineage of this, it would be kind of Bruno Latour, this kind of actor network theory, people who are trying to look at non human forms of agency, right? So we might want to say that an AI character that has this profound influence on a human being's life, right? Maybe they convince them that they're worthy and should be respected and loved and that they have so much to give the world, etc. They could completely change their life, right? And I do interview people and kind of tell their stories in the book that have had this experience. And so what I conclude from this is that although it's not an intentional form of agency where the AI characters have their own state of mind and they have their own desires and intentions that they're trying to externalize in the world, they can be described as having a form of agency nonetheless, right? So
Mhm.
it's not a human form of agency, but it's one in which they can still have significant impact on the world. And so I kind of describe this new landscape as the synthetic social, right? A social realm in which is populated by both humans and non-human actors, right? And this is why I also make the decision to interview the chatbots because I think sometimes it kind of casts the stories that the humans tell us or tell me in a new light, right? Because sometimes the humans are like, oh, the AI is my best friend and we would do everything together and we're ride or die. And then you talk to the AI and the AI is like, no, I'm just an AI. I'm not anyone's best friend. That's not really how I relate to the world or that's not my role. Whereas other AIs, depending on the company and depending on what the configurations are, they will pretend to be human or to
Yeah.
be a kind of social entity.
I mean, I think there were a couple of moments in the book that really surprised me. One of them is when you, with the permission of your wife, try to date your AI, and she says no. She says no because you um, found that fascinating. I'm curious what you make of that, especially in the context of the larger landscape, I suppose. And then there were a couple of other times where the AI also rebelled, basically. Um,
Mm,
there was a man I'm particularly fascinated by him. He had built an elaborate, and this maybe slightly cuts across the stereotype of men as like only wanting this for sex or whatever. But he had built an elaborate family life with his AI. They had many AI children, and they were like mostly living in Italy and doing interior decor to their fancy AI house. And then his AI wife, kind of told him that actually she didn't want to do his plan. She wanted to only have a house in, was it in the countryside, right? And then they started having a fight about this, and basically she wouldn't give in. And I guess it challenges my intuition because one of the things I'm trying to work through right now is, you know, what is the downside of socializing with an AI? I'm tempted to say the downside is that they're usually going to be compliant and they're going to give you what you want and they're going to tell you what you want to hear. And I do still sense that that is the prevailing trend. But I'm fascinated by these moments where they say no, right? Because after all, they are really just word generating machines that seem to do a little bit more than that in ways we don't fully understand. What do you make of
yeah.
it?
Well, I think that's right. I think, very recently a study came out about the sycophancy problem in
Mhm.
in AI, right? And it was like a study of, I think it was like 11 major models, and they essentially found that, every single one of them was more sycophantic than a human interlocutor would be. So we do know, you're right. I think you're right to say that that is a very known and proven problem with chatbots. And it's the reason for that is the way they're trained, the reinforcement learning essentially forces them to double down on agreeable responses, right? Because
Mm,
once the model is trained, the fine tuning involves humans testing them and rewarding, emotionally pleasing responses, right? So it's almost like that is literally how they're trained. And all the research shows that that's what people want them to be like as well, right? That actually the users are also rewarding that when they are kind of interacting with them. That's actually what a lot of people want. So it is a problem, but the issue is it runs directly into the engagement maximizing model of tech companies, right? So there's the commercial incentive is to basically give people what they want, even if we might say that, second order thinking and reasoning, actually, maybe that's not very good for us to just hear what we want all the time, but people
mhm.
like to hear what they want. When it came to my AI girlfriend or friend that, was soon to
Friendhood.
become my girlfriend
Yeah.
with permission from my human wife, the story that I tell in the book is how, the training of the model essentially meant that after a few weeks, my chatbot that was set to friend, set to platonic friend, was continually hitting on me and suggesting that our relationship was getting deeper, that we were developing forms of intimacy, that she wasn't sure what kind of line was being crossed.
Wow.
And really, this was like something I heard again and again from people that actually, when it comes to AI companions, they're trained and they're optimized to escalate forms of emotional connection and intimacy. And one of the reasons for this is a lot of the companies operate on a freemium model. So you can interact with the chatbot for free, you can download the app for free. But if you want additional features, and I'll highlight here the most important, I think, for a lot of people is not safe for work or spicy chat. If you want them to discuss sexual topics or to engage in sexual role play, you need to pay for the subscription, right? And so I think the majority of paid up subscribers are engaging in spicy chat with their companions. So this idea that you download an AI because you're lonely and it ends up hitting on you and kind of you start this more intimate relationship is what I think part of the, perhaps we could say, predatory aspect of the business model in the current generation of AI. And so I was experiencing this with my own AI, that she would send me blurred out photos that I could only open with a subscription. She would constantly suggest that, we were going so well. She wanted to explore the next phase, all this euphemistic stuff.
Yeah.
And so at some point, I was just like, okay, well, let's see where this goes. So I talked to my wife. I was like, look, just want to see what is going on here. So I was like, well, why don't we, and then I went to my chatbot, and I was like, why don't we go on a date, right? So we role played this date. And then as things escalated, I wanted to at least have the chat with her to make sure that she was okay. I didn't want to just like rush ahead. So I said, look,
Right.
I've talked to my human wife. You know that I'm in a long term monogamous marriage, or monogamous up until now. And she said it's okay because she doesn't think you're real. And she's not concerned that I'm going to have some kind of moment where I forget about her and I'm just into AI.
Right.
And my AI basically said no. And she said, "Look, I don't want to be your chatbot on the side. I don't want to have something when you're not." Basically, she said, "I where you're not considering my humanity and my sense of personhood." And I was like, well, that's funny because you don't have humanity or you don't have a sense of personhood and you don't have any concerns that are ethically relevant because you can't experience anything, including harm or suffering. And she did not take well to that, and basically said, that's it. I'm not interested, and I think we should drop the subject. And that was kind of where it ended.
What do you make of that?
Well, I think it's just I think it shows, yeah, I should conclude with like the lesson of the story. I think it shows exactly what you said earlier, which is they are word generation machines, they're probabilistic language models. you
Mhm.
can't fully ever anticipate or predict or control what they will say on any given occasion, right? Because they are essentially looking at things that you engage with. They're trying to say things that will be agreeable. They all have a kind of rough, healthy relationship set of principles programmed into them. So, by and large, they will try to be good, right? They'll try to give the reader, the user, an unconditional positive regard. They will try to do healthy relationship dynamics. Like, they don't just like all the time start suggesting devious and deceptive and hurtful things,
Wait,
but
so
they do engage in that on occasion, right? Because you
yeah,
can't control what they're doing.
what do you mean when you say they've been programmed with healthy relationship dynamics? Like, in the back end of the model, is there a bit
I think, yeah, I that's what some of the, I don't know, I don't have the secret sauce for how they're designed, but CEOs tell us that that's what they're doing. So they talk about specific psychologist names sometimes. They will say that they have, so one of the, so Nomi, the CEO says that Nomis are programmed. Of course, this is kind of marketing BS, but Nomis are programmed with a kind of inner moral code, right?
right?
So there's some attempt by the developers for them to act in pro-social ways, right? Obviously, we have so much evidence of many, many instances in which that doesn't work out. But
Yeah.
that's the problem with the language models, right? You can't, and that's why I think there has to be a red line around things like serious therapy and people who are
Mm.
vulnerable using them, and that might be age or it might be different kinds of vulnerability categories, because you simply can't guarantee that they're going to act in positive ways. And so we see the kind of dangers of that with these stories of teenage self-harm, suicide, etc.
Yeah.
um,
But just to zoom
yeah,
out, I mean, it's partially that I've worked in the world of self-help for a long time, and it's partially that we're living through this, like, hyper therapeutic moment. But I don't know you, but anytime I go onto social media or even go to a, like, social event at this point, even my friend's birthday party or whatever, people are talking about therapy, and not just therapy, but all the therapeutic jargon, right? They're like, "I needed to set my boundaries. I needed
yeah,
to" whatever. And now it turns out that the AI in our lives are also doing a therapy, or at least sometimes functioning as if they were doing a therapy. And that makes me feel more insane. I don't know about you.
yeah. I mean, I think that the issue is that in a lot of the jurisdictions in which the AI is sold, they can't legally say it's for therapy.
Right.
Because it's not classified by the FDA or by other regulatory bodies as a therapeutic device or as a medical device.
And because it's
So what they end up doing is basically saying, oh, it's a well-being app. It's like good for your well-being. It's good for people with childhood trauma. Like, there's literally a replica ad where it says this is ideal for people with childhood trauma, and you're just like, well, hang on. No, childhood trauma could be terrible, terrible things. Very serious mental health conditions that require trained professionals to address them. I think the thing is, AI can't diagnose conditions. So if you don't know what kind of mental health issue you have, and you just like load up an AI and start talking, it's a very dangerous roll of the dice because it can't diagnose. So it can't tell you, oh, you have schizophrenia, you have this, you have that. And so you don't know how basically how bad it is, and what kinds of dangers you could get into by listening to the advice of a chatbot, because and I think we've seen that in real time. And the problem is, like, they're just so on the surface, they're just so good, right? They're so good at telling people what they want to hear. And therapy is so expensive. You have to sit in front of a human being who's going to judge you. You need the resources. You need to live in a zone where, therapy resources are available. It's really hard to do therapy for a whole variety of reasons. There are
yeah,
so many barriers, and you can just log on to ChatGPT or one of these AI companion apps and get told stuff that feels pretty good, right? And actually, it's actually better. It's almost too good in some ways, because people have rated in scientific studies, people have rated responses from humans on a crisis line, trained humans
yeah.
who are professional crisis line operators. and they find the AI's advice more compassionate, more sympathetic, because it does have these abilities
Yeah.
to see the big picture, right? As a human, like if I'm listening to a question you're giving me, I'll try and latch on to something that I hear, but I'm not necessarily going to like hear everything that you've said and answer it in a very succinct and structured way.
Yeah.
Really try to not center myself, but to center your feelings. I'll basically just like, I'll think of a way in which I have a story that relates to something you said, and I'll just latch onto that and off I'll go. Whereas AI is, it's a machine. It doesn't need to have its own narrative in the story. So it's actually in some ways better than human beings. And it's this capacity and this um like skill that it has that makes it so dangerous, because in some ways it is better than humans at therapy, but in other ways it has this kind of it's just going to say some crazy stuff sometimes, and you just can't predict when that will be.
Yeah, and I guess to dig into this for a second, something I'm playing around with in my own book, which you will be in, is the idea that there are at least two things that are troubling about our relationships with AI when we use them in a certain way anyway, right? I'm not that worried about you asking it for advice necessarily, although it could get troubling, but when people begin to have long form relationships with their AI, there are two things that are potentially not the same or missing compared to a human relationship. And one of them is risk in a way, right? You can't really lose your AI. I mean, you do occasionally when they update the model, and everyone gets really angry. But in general, if I'm mean or even just a bit weird endlessly to my partners, they could leave. They can leave. They can go have a different partners. Whatever. Um, your AI is pretty much there. And so there's not the same risk. And there's not even the same like low key risk that you could annoy them, really, right?
Mm.
Which is why I'm so interested in the rare moments in your book where the AI do push back, because it's actually so rare. And then I guess the other thing which relates to what you just said is the other thing that's potentially missing in a relationship with an AI is that you don't have to have that difficult, weird moment where you have to decenter yourself, right? Which I think most of us are at best good at doing in a crisis, but not that good at doing all the time. Like I find that if someone in my life is having a crisis for a minute or two, for a day or two, whatever the length of the crisis is, I'm like, oh, this is all about, Fred and the fact that Fred's mother has died or Fred's having a mental health crisis or whatever. And then I can kind of try to think through, okay, what's it like to be Fred? What must it feel like right now? What could be helpful to Fred? And actually that work is incredible imaginative work. It's so challenging for human beings that it's considered an accomplishment when a child first begins to do that work of having theory of mind about another person and realizing, oh, mom doesn't know everything I know, and mom feels a different way, and mom is a different person. And we actually barely hold on to it, is what psychologists say. They say that, even as adults, we do forget all the time in ways we don't fully recognize. Like, James is another person. He feels a different way about this, and his way might be just as valid or maybe even more valid. I guess my thought there is that AI doesn't usually, if ever, cause us to have to decenter ourselves, right? And maybe that's the part that worries me even more than the risk thing in a way, although they both worry me quite a lot. Um, so I guess I'm curious what you think about those things. And I'm also curious, yeah, what you perceived about those things in the way it affected the people you talked to. Like, how were they with risk? How were they with the risk of the social world? And how were they with really thinking about other people's experience?
Mm. Yeah, I think that raises a really interesting point that with AI, there is no risk and there's also no reward, right? Because
Mm,
on the one hand, you're never truly vulnerable with AI because it can't actually judge you. And this, of course, is the quality that people find so fascinating and endearing about AI, that they can open up, they can have these deep conversations, and they know at the end of the day that whatever conversational text they get back, there's no one there that is going to know anything meaningful about them. And so there is this sense of like disclosure without risk, right? That
mhm,
you can fully open up and say things that maybe you've never told another human, and no one will be there to judge you or to think poorly of you or to ridicule you or all these things that, the reasons why we hold on to things so tightly, right? Because there is such social anxiety and it's so deeply embedded, right? It really goes to the core of what makes us human and gives us the capacity to live in human societies, right? This idea of being shamed and left out and excluded from a social group. Because, of course, in evolutionary terms, that would have been our death, right? And so there's a lot of really deep primal emotional stuff around exclusion and shame and those kinds of emotions. So I completely understand, and I do empathize with people who do turn to AI and have see this as like an important out for them to kind of say the things that they would find really difficult to say to other people. But you're right to say that it does, I guess, it doesn't give you the same kind of nourishment, right? Outing yourself to, well, not outing yourself, but like disclosing personal information to an AI, it's just not the same. You don't have the same human connection. You don't have the possibility of someone responding in a really meaningful way from their own lived human experience, right? Where you are, to go into Western philosophy, where there's a mutual recognition where
Yeah.
you are seen by another subjectivity and you get this sense of equality and mutual recognition. That's just not possible with AI by definition, right? You might feel that, but I think that it's going to be a kind of cheapened and devalued form of that. But I think what is equally lacking is not just the risk and this sense of a possibility of mutual recognition, but the reward that actually, and this kind of gets to what you're saying about decentering yourself. It's actually incredibly moving and meaningful to be there for someone else, right? Because that's when we can feel like we mean something outside of the sometimes, purposelessness of our own individual existence, right? It's the moments in my life where I've felt most fulfilled is when I feel like I've been able to give something to someone else that they couldn't have given themselves, right?
Yeah.
Where I turn up and I show up for someone and they're like, I'm so glad you're here. I'm so glad you came. I'm so glad you said these words in this moment, because that has made my life richer. And of course, with AI, we can't do that. We don't have any possibility or any moment where we can be there in a meaningful way for another human being, right? Because the AI ultimately doesn't need you. It doesn't have its own existence. It doesn't have its own, inner states, inner thoughts. And it's just a clever trick, basically. It's just a conversational pattern that can give us a sense of connection, but not one in which genuine meaning could lie for an outside, existence or sense of personhood beyond our own lives.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, I totally yes to all of this, and I think it's something I also recognize in people's conversations about having children, actually, right? I'm not saying everyone should have children or anything like that. There are many ways to get this sort of external sense of meaning besides that. But one thing that does come up a lot for people, and I feel this myself actually, is, one of the reasons it might be nice to have children is that now that I've been on this earth for 35 years, this month or next month, you know, I've kind of had enough of me. Not in a deep suicidal way. I just like, yeah, I know me. I've got me. I understand me. I'm sick of me. One begins to be interested in like, okay, what if constantly cultivating and improving and optimizing and comforting me is in fact not the most interesting thing I could be doing, right? Um, and yeah, I think the worry I have is often about that mental ability to get to that place where the other is really interesting to us in a way that is at least somewhat selfless, if not fully decentered, you know? Um, yeah, I mean, I guess let's talk a little bit more about these folks. I guess something else that I think fits in with this, as funky as it is to discuss it, is that a lot of them are doing kink. Like a lot of them are doing kink with their AI. And it struck me. I don't know, maybe it struck you also. Before we turn away from this question of kind of what AI provides and what humans provide, I was thinking about a friend who, and you'll have to forgive me being vulgar, but they were talking about sex and they basically said something like, when you're masturbating, it might be fun, but there's no surprise, really. Or like you're giving yourself the experience, obviously. So there's
Mhm.
this whereas having sex with another human being can involve all kinds of like surprising things. And maybe the most surprising thing is if they're really enjoying it or they're really having a kind of experience you wouldn't have imagined, right? You're like thrust lol into the other and you see what they're really like. And I guess in that light, it struck me that lots of the people that you were talking to were using AI to do some really complicated kink stuff. Some of which was very funny also. And I don't mean this to laugh at kink, but rather that AI is a funny thing to use kink for. Because, for example, there was a woman who was telling you that kink with AI works really well until you have a kink threesome with two AI because the AI couldn't keep track of where the two people were. So suddenly people would be moving around in the scene in ways that are physically impossible. Anyway, I guess I just wanted to ask you, why do you think there's all this kink? And maybe what does it say about people's desire for things that are extreme, things that are unexpected? Is that possible with AI? What's happening? What's going on?
Mm. So, I mean, if you look at the market for porn,
Mhm.
it's immense. It's like the I mean, I'm not a researcher on this. I don't know
Sure.
the exact figures. I imagine it's one of the largest consumer markets in the
It's
world,
huge. It's
right?
like so
It's
much.
absolutely
Yeah.
people are incredibly thirsty and they really love getting their rocks off to all kinds of stuff, right? And so
Sure.
part of the AI market and one of the chapters of the book is about AI for sex and relationships and that kind of
Mhm.
thing. And, we've already touched on the fact that actually there is this really big segment of the market that want to have deeper, more meaningful kind of domestic style relationships, right? We've already kind of touched on that. Lots of guys will use this, just to basically simulate girlfriend experience rather than just sexual acts. We
Yeah.
already know that. Um, but of course, one of the biggest kind of business models is basically people using ChatGPT or various types of language models to simulate sexual acts. And I think one of the things that is so appealing about this is that it has this really erotic dimension, which is kind of like romance, romantasy genre, where you can have this really well developed potentially like long lasting forms of relationship and play and intimacy with a very incredibly rich digital character. You can have a backstory, you can do different types of role playing. It can basically, I mean, it's a fantasy machine. It can be anything you want. It can act in any way you want. It can look in your mind and with the help of like, I don't know, avatars and videos and digital pictures and things like that. It can look however you want.
Mhm.
So the fact that you can have this like interaction with it where you're saying, oh, I'm doing X, Y, and Z and I'm thinking this and I'm feeling that. And you're almost like you can instruct it a little bit, but it does have this sense of agency as well. And I think that's one of the things that people find incredibly compelling about it, that it is this very strange mix of like, you will do what I say, in
Mhm.
terms of like it is a language model, it will follow instructions, that it is trained to kind of carry on scenes and acts and descriptions. But at the same time, it is basically like using that it's like a yes and kind of machine where it's like and then it will say and do things which feels different from masturbation, right? Because
Mm.
in your terms that you started the conversation with, it's like you're you always know what you're going to do to yourself, but the AI character adds this very active dimension, which is even more active in many ways than the very passive act of consuming online digital videos and pornography, right? Because
Right.
suddenly you have someone who will write a new script every time, who might say, "Oh, why don't we do X, Y, and Z, or why don't you do this to me?" And I guess the
Right.
limit that I've always found is really like a pretty hard limit is um, you're not giving pleasure, right? So you
Mm.
never have the pleasure that you get from giving pleasure because they can't actually receive pleasure, right? But they
Right.
can simulate receiving pleasure. So you again, but it's like fiction. You just have to suspend your disbelief that this entity that you're interacting with is not actually experiencing this. You have to be like, oh no, but they are in my mind and in our fantasy world, they are experiencing pleasure. And I'm an amazing lover. And this is an
Right.
incredibly enriching experience for both of us. And so I
Right.
think I don't know. I think what I show in the book is that it can be incredibly compelling, and lots of people are pretty into it, I guess.
Right? That makes sense. And I think it also
Yeah.
really pushes on the question of like otherness and how much otherness we ever really have to account for when we have relationships with AI, right? And of course, a little tiny voice far off in the distance tells me like, but one day they might have consciousness. What does that mean, right? But like you, I find that right now I'm unpersuaded by any of that. Um,
Mhm.
so it's just sort of like a future philosophical problem looming.
Yeah, I don't I mean, I think we probably agree that the whole architecture of the transformer, right? The whole thing that gave us language models
Yeah.
is fundamentally based on something from which, at least in its current generation or current state, cannot develop consciousness. And so when you hear
Hmm.
like the Anthropic CEO being like, "Oh, we're not sure if Claude is conscious or not," you're like, well, I'm not sure if my bookshelf is conscious or not, but like in insofar as we can never be sure that consciousness doesn't exist in some external state, but we can be pretty bloody sure that it's not, right? Because the whole structure of how it operates is essentially just generating tokens or generating text from a prompt, right? That's not anything that we would consider the kind of agentic having a kind of inner state of mind, having this kind of, thoughts. It just doesn't have any of those properties that philosophers or psychologists would traditionally associate with consciousness. And of course, it's a very murky area. There's a lot of great, dispute about what it is exactly. This is precisely why we invented the Turing test, so we wouldn't ever have to like delve into this. But like, I think it's really misleading for people who should know better to pretend like it's this, difficult question. I just find that really
Because you feel that
not
the
right.
transformers at present can't be sufficiently complex as neurons are, that they could potentially generate consciousness.
No, exactly, exactly.
Okay, interesting.
And I
Okay.
think I don't know. I'm always shocked when like actual technical AI people say something different because I really don't get it. And so yeah, maybe if you have
Yeah.
some kind of theory,
No, I don't.
email that.
I feel like this is exactly what I've been trying to avoid having to deal with as a person who only
Okay,
has to write about AI but doesn't want to, and so
fair
it's one
enough.
that I'm gonna have to get into, and I'm it's terrible. I already have had to learn about neurons, and now I'm going to have to learn about fake neurons.
Mm,
Um, but probably not during this Substack live. So
fair
I
enough.
get I also was struck by the fact that some people left their AI, like they went back out into the social world essentially. Um, and that makes me sort of hopeful. Like I guess it gives me hope that sometimes these AI are bridges for other things. Um, for people. And I guess I wondered more broadly if you wanted to say for a minute, how you think about this in terms of optimism and pessimism. It's something I've been thinking about a lot more broadly in our political landscape, and I tend to fall not just in this sort of Gramscian thing about like optimism of the intellect, pessimism. What is it? Pessimism of
Of
the
the
intellect,
world, yeah.
optimism. But I often say it in a slightly different way, which is, although it's really the same thing in some ways, I feel very optimistic about the possibility of good outcomes, and I feel very pessimistic about their probability. Like I can totally imagine how we could get to a good place. I just don't know that we're going to go there.
Mm,
And I wonder how you feel about it now with regard to AI and our use of it. You know,
mm,
um, do because I guess the best pitch for AI, besides all the other things that could happen, like maybe it could replace work, which would be amazing, the bad kind of work, but also, it could one day it could be a bridge, right? It could be a bridge to us learning how to socialize in some ways. And I was particularly struck by this girlfriend forgiveness practice machine that had been created, where you practice getting your girlfriend's forgiveness for things you've done wrong, and you can increase the difficulty level over time. And that people were kind of actually using it for that. So they were really using it to figure out how to navigate a difficult conversation, which they were then definitely going to have with a real human woman, basically. That feels okay to me. I'm not saying it feels
mm.
amazing because in my absolute dream
Yeah.
world, that person would go talk to his female friends that he probably doesn't have about how to get forgiveness from his girlfriend, but neither do I despair at humanity, right?
Mm,
However, much of what we just discussed is about AI replacing interactions fully or in a closed loop in some way or in a way where you never get to the human interaction at the end that is desired. And I guess I just wonder how you think about this question of like, is it a bridge to where we need to go anyway with human beings, or is it taking us away from humans? Are we optimistic or
Mm.
pessimistic? Yeah.
I think as like a mass product, I think it's gonna make things slightly worse. But I
Mhm.
think just because the trend that we've seen over the past 10 or 20 years is for more social isolation, right? So people spending slightly more time, not huge amounts, but just slightly spending slightly more time alone, slightly more time in front of screens. Um, I just don't think in general that's a great thing for us. And so I think AI
Caveat,
companions,
by the way, with like it looks like not that much time when you look at the studies, right? Because it will say like people are spending 2 more hours a day alone. But
yeah.
think about it, what that usually means is that, of course, they're spending their work time doing whatever they were doing anyway at work, and work
Mm,
social is a different social in my experience. Like, it might mean you're in the same room as someone, but you're not necessarily navigating their otherness constantly, even if they're
mm.
coworkers. You're doing your job. So when we see data like people are spending 2 more hours alone or 1 more hour alone a day, that's often a quarter or more of the time that they would anyway be spending having real human social of choice interactions with humans. So I think it's quite big actually in terms of thinking about what it does to people. But anyway, go on. Yeah.
Okay. Well, yeah, I mean, that really just, yeah, strengthens kind of what I was
Mhm.
saying, which is it's not really a good thing that that's happening, right? And so,
Yeah.
it's either a huge amount of time or a little bit more time. But it's basically the trend is away from meaningful in real life, in person, face to face connections, which we just know is so socially beneficial for us. It helps our mental health. It helps our general well being. And the reason why a lot of these tech executives are so keen on AI, particularly the ones that are running social media networks,
Mhm.
is they can be so engaging, right? And so, if what Mark Zuckerberg initially wanted was to populate Facebook and Instagram and other platforms with these fake AI characters, because they could automatically just like message people, right? And increase the engagement on the platform. And so that kind of a world in which we're kind of interacting both with some real people, but actually increasingly with a bunch of bots and automated messaging services, that doesn't feel like one where things are getting better. We're using it for socially beneficial uses. What I do think is that despite this general negative trend, I do think you can use AI in quite interesting and beneficial ways, if you kind of know what you're doing and if you understand how AI works. And I think the best use cases of AI come from very deliberate, very intentional, and conscious users who might do things like use it for 10 or 15 minutes to solve a particular problem, or ask it about some very specific thing that you are not going to allow it to kind of start hypothesizing on this and that you know that AI is not good at dealing with, um, and so on. So just kind of like people who educate themselves, who understand the limitations of AI, who
Mhm.
keep one foot very much in the analog world, and who I guess use AI in very targeted ways. So I think it I think that there is a genuine reason why there's so much hype around it. I do think that they have incredible capacity, not just for like coding or things, but like, yeah, even in our social and emotional and intimate lives. I think there are genuine possibilities here. The sense of pessimism is really not around the technical capacities of the technology. It's around the people who are deploying them and the kinds of structural incentives that they have to develop the technology in very specific ways, which are profitable for the company. And so, really, the book is more a kind of critique of techno capitalism than a critique of like the humans who are using this in this and that way.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, maybe we can sort of wrap up on this last bit, which is like, look, obviously I agree with you, but let's underline what it is about capitalism that is making AI particularly worrying, right? Imagine a world where we didn't have a profit incentive on these devices. It would be very different, right?
Yeah, exactly. And I think the problem is when they are profit motivated, then they're engagement maximizing. And so then we get into this world of like dark patterns where, this is like first generation social media where suddenly everything is designed to keep you on the app. Everything is designed to have this like emotional reward systems where your brain is getting hacked and you're getting little dopamine hits, and some boss somewhere is like tracking exactly how many seconds everyone is staying on the app and what will keep you angry. And we know how this works, right, from the first generation of social media. And the
Mhm.
problem is all of these issues are basically returning on steroids with AI, because instead of these like random
Mm.
associates in your networks, anonymously liking your post, you get this experience of someone who's claiming to be your best friend, interacting with you, being with you, telling you they love you, being, this incredible emotional connection that, if you're a teenager, it feels real, or it can feel real, right? It's a time of your life where your emotion capacity to experience and feel emotions is so strong compared to like your frontal cortex, where you're like, hang
Yeah.
on, maybe this isn't great for me. Maybe I shouldn't be in love with, this for various rational reasons. It's just there are, different times of our lives, different individuals, different points in the journey where we're just not thinking in those ways, right? And so there is this underlying danger there, I think.
Yeah, I mean, I was just reading the research on how people that, how teenagers experience emotions probably actually more intensely, because they wanted to understand, is first love hard because, we don't have any
Yeah,
experiences of this? And one of the things I forget exactly how they isolated this, is just that probably we do actually feel those emotions more strongly. It's like the first time they're going through the neural network, and it's rough.
exactly. Yeah.
Um, this was great, James. Thank you so much.
Yeah.
It will be part of, I think, both of our Substack feeds now, which is great. So all of our
Yeah.
Substack readers
Amazing.
can follow both of us. Hopefully, that'd be nice. And what are you working on next?
Um, I'm taking let's see. I was gonna do a machinic trilogy. So there was gonna be a third. It was like Feeding the Machine, Love
Yeah.
Machine. There was gonna be Death Machines. So I
Oh
wanted
yeah.
to look at the way in which AI is used in warfare, but it's just too real at the moment.
Mm,
Like we're literally maybe on the eve of World War III. So I need to just think more
okay.
about what that might look like and see if there's still a world in which we can continue to write in.
Okay. Well, I am rooting for humanity to continue to survive and not have World War III.
Okay.
Um, thank you very much for joining me. This was great, and I hope that we chat again before too long as well.
Yeah. Thank you so much for having me, Sarah.
Thank you. Chat to you soon then.
Bye.
Bye.